Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Hello, my darlings. I have some more wonderful true Skinwalker stories from Lyshaninja to share with you. You know it's one of my favorite subjects. Hello, everyone. It's been a long time since I've posted. I've been super busy with work and haven't had much time to write. I thought it was about time that I sit down and tell another one of my Skinwalker stories. This is a story that was told by my uncle's wife. She lives outside of Gallup in a community called Bread Springs. I've told one of her stories in the past, so if you haven't read that story, you should really go back and check it out. In fact, if you haven't read any of my other stories, I would greatly appreciate it if you took the time to read them. One evening, my aunt was home with her siblings. Her parents ran into town to do some errands and wouldn't be back until late. She lived in a pretty rural area, surrounded by a thick forest. Her house was pretty small and they had few horses. Their horse corral was quite a ways from their house. Each evening the kids would be sent out to tend the horses by giving them hay and filling the water troughs. The hay bales were stacked near the barn. The bales of hay were large, each about 4 feet long, 2 feet high, and 3 feet wide. There was a stack of these large bales, maybe 30 of them. My aunt said that they didn't have a very large barn, and so they'd keep the hay outside and cover it up when it rained. As they were taking hay to the horses and filling the water troughs, my aunt heard a sound. It was a shuffling, scratching noise. The sound was amplified when all of the children stopped to listen. Where they lived, it was so quiet. They could hear the wind softly blowing the trees, but then it would be interrupted by the sound. My aunt's older brother walked around to pinpoint the sound. It was coming from behind the hay. There was a space between the hay and the barn. Not very big at all. The kids all looked and saw something dark wedged between the bales of hay and the wall of the barn. When it moved, its body scraped against the hard surface of the barn. The kids wondered what it was. No one was sure. They figured that whatever it was harmless and went to finish their work. It started to get darker, and the kids thought they would look to see if the thing was still there. It was still wedged against the wall, but this time it wasn't moving. Suddenly, it began to cry out like a cat. Meowing began to come from behind the hay. It sounded strange. It was off. Whatever was behind the hay was too large to be any cat. My aunt said they got very scared because the more they listened to the noise the thing made, the more it sounded like a person trying to mimic a cat. The kids went inside the house and locked the door. By this time it was dark. The kids were sitting in the house, not talking very much. My aunt said that her brother told them to be quiet, and he kept peeking out the window towards the barn. Suddenly, loud noises were heard. Rapid pounding was coming from above, as if someone was running on the roof. My aunt said it had to be a person because the footsteps were so loud. She began crying and screaming as the footsteps ran back and forth. Whatever it was ran back and forth on the roof several minutes. None of the kids were brave enough to investigate. The footsteps finally stopped. It got very quiet, and the kids sat together, shaking with fear. Their attention was drawn back to the door. They heard noises coming from outside. They all huddled together, bracing themselves for the worst. The door opened, and dread was immediately substituted with relief as their parents walked in the door. My aunt and her siblings told her parents what had happened, and they thought that was the end of their horrifying encounter. However, as the days went on, her family would hear the footsteps on their roof at night. Whoever it was would run back and forth, even when her parents were home. She said that her dad would open a window and yell at whoever it was in Navajo. He would tell it to leave his family alone, and then he would begin to pray. My aunt says that eventually the footsteps stopped, but that this was not the last encounter that she would have with skinwalkers. Thank you again for reading. I surely enjoy sitting with my family and hearing these old stories of their encounters. Part 9. Hello everyone. If you're new here, I am a Navajo individual that has been collecting and sharing stories that real people, mostly family, have told me about the Yanalglotchi Skinwalkers. My apologies for that mispronunciation. Considering that speaking of skinwalkers is taboo and all stories are oral retelling, I'll do my best to capture these frightening moments as genuinely as possible. This is part 9 of my series. I just heard this gem from and knew I immediately had to post. There's a small community called Church Rock that's a few miles outside of Gallup, New Mexico. Many of the people that live here have had land passed down many generations. This is where our story begins. 2 generations ago. There was a woman that was infatuated with a man in her community. She requested that the man build her a home. In exchange, she would give her daughter to the man to serve as his maid. The woman thought that the man worked on her home. She could woo him in the process. The deal was sealed and the man built the woman a home. The man collected his payment, but instead of having his daughter as a maid, he married her. The mother became enraged with jealousy and ran the newly married couple out of the community. The couple relocated to Rama and started a new life. They had 6 children, 2 of which were twin girls. In Navajo tradition, twins are seen as very powerful. In the mythology of Navajos, the children of the sun were twins, and so they are held in very high regard. This is the story from one of those twin girls. The family began construction on a new home. While they were building the house, the children would play outside as the adults worked. As they were playing, the older twin noticed an animal emerge from the woods. It was a coyote. Usually coyotes are very skittish and avoid humans at any cost. The coyote made its way closer to the girl. A strange smell filled the air, like something dead. The coyote came right up to her. She said that the coyote didn't bite her, but instead put its mouth over her mouth and began to suck the breath from her. It was at this point that she lost consciousness. One of the adults was working on the house when he saw what was happening, and everyone rushed towards the coyote and the girl. The adults yelled and shouted as they ran towards them. The coyote darted back into the woods, and the girl fell to the ground. She was blue. The family worked fast and was able to resuscitate her. The incident resulted in the family going to see a medicine man. He told them it was the grandmother, still harboring jealous feelings towards her own daughter and her family. They had a prayer done, and it was thought to be the end of it. Later, the family received news that the grandmother had died. As the years passed, construction on the home continued, and the twin girls continued to grow. The family had built the first story of their home and moved in. The twin sisters shared a bedroom and slept together on a king-sized bed. It was a hot summer night, and the family kept all of the windows open to keep the rooms cool during the night. One night, the older twin arose to use the restroom. The family kept a small light on in the hallway. She got out of bed and walked down the hallway and did her business. She returned to bed. As she was covering herself, she happened to look up. She froze in horror. There, at an open window, was a coyote, its eyes shining from the hallway light. The window was pretty high, and so the coyote had to have been standing on its rear legs. The girl was frozen with fear and made complete eye contact with the coyote. It was then that she noticed the same smell, the smell of death. She snapped and ran out of the room, screaming and crying. She ran to her parents' room and got her father. He ran to the bedroom, half expecting it to be a figment of his daughter's imagination. But the strong smell hit him, and there was the coyote, still standing at the window. The father yelled and ran to get his rifle. The man ran out of his home, but the coyote was gone. The family tried to comfort the little girl, but she sobbed until morning. Again, the family sought out a medicine man. He explained to the family that the hatred of the grandmother had for the family was so strong that the ill intentions that she had for the couple and their family proceeded even after the grandmother's death. When the family was blessed with twins, the grandmother knew the strength it would bring the family, so she wanted to get rid of one of them. The older twin recalls these events vividly and swears that the coyote that attempted to suffocate her and the one at her window were one and the same. Even the scent of death was familiar the second time she encountered the creature. She hasn't seen it since that night and is very grateful for that. This is a story my family told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her two brothers were home alone, while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside they heard noises as if someone moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went up to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off in the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked towards the light and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. The oldest uncle ran towards the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking its head out to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed them over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired towards the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside and my uncles, and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed in one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was, running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that dropped about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her, and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who a Skinwalker is, say their name, and it will kill them. So quoth this raven. And I hope you've enjoyed these stories, my darlings. I do love a good, true Skinwalker story from a Navajo themselves. I know I'm kind of particular about that, but I am in Utah, and I grew up in Utah, and it makes a difference to me anyway. I am so glad you came, and a special thanks to Ermin Case and Darren Da, and my new supporter, Laura Setapenra. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.